Welcome, traveler. I am Jungle James, your guide here at the Academy of Sleep. We bring you slow, thoughtful lectures, ideal companions for bedtime. Before the tale unfolds, I ask only this: subscribe, and leave a token of your visit with a like. And now, let the story begin. The Great Silk Road, Fates of the Caravans. Introduction. A journey begins. Close your eyes. Let the weight of the day slip gently from your shoulders. You are safe. You are still. And somewhere far beyond time, a road begins. Not a single road, but a whispering thread, winding across the world, woven through deserts and mountains, cities and silence. A path walked by emperors and exiles, merchants and monks. A road of silk and stories. Tonight, we follow that ancient path. We walk beneath starlit skies, where the sand holds secrets and the wind carries songs from forgotten lands. The Silk Road, a name like a lullaby. Soft, delicate, yet strong enough to bind entire worlds together. You'll feel the rhythm of caravan hooves, the rustle of silk in desert wind, the distant echo of languages now long asleep. But don't worry about the direction. On this journey, there's no need to arrive, only to drift, to listen, and to dream. So breathe in, slowly. Let the air fill your chest like the wind swelling a traveler's cloak. And as you exhale, feel yourself stepping onto the sands of history. The road is waiting. Chapter 1. The Thread of Silk. Part 1. A road woven by time. The Silk Road was never just a road. It had no single beginning, no true end. It was not carved into stone or marked with signs. It lived in the minds of traders, the feet of travelers, and the hopes of those who waited on the other side. It was a network, a breath, a rhythm that pulsed across the spine of Asia. Imagine standing at the edge of a desert, the sky stretching like silk, dyed in fading gold. The sun dips low and shadows lengthen. In the distance, a slow-moving caravan appears. Camels swaying gently, bells tinkling like wind chimes. Their silhouettes blur into the heat. These are the threads that stitch the east to the west. Long before the word Silk Road was ever spoken, the path was walked. In ancient China, during the Han Dynasty, silk was not just cloth. It was a treasure, as valuable as gold, as mysterious as moonlight. Only the Chinese knew how to make it, and they guarded the secret like a sacred spell. Silk flowed from their looms like water, dyed with herbs and minerals, painted with symbols and dreams. As silk made its way westward, it passed through valleys, mountains, river crossings, and bustling oases. It moved from hand to hand, traded for horses, glass, perfumes, or rare spices. And with each exchange, stories traveled too. Not just goods, but beliefs, melodies, maps drawn in memory, and letters written in unfamiliar scripts. To call it a trade route feels too simple. It was a living thing, shifting, breathing, evolving. Sometimes it blossomed with peace and commerce. Sometimes it withered in war and drought. But always, it returned, reshaped, reimagined. Along this invisible road, cultures brushed against one another like drifting clouds. Ideas spread like seeds on the wind. Mathematics from India, astronomy from Persia, paper from China, and philosophies that would echo through temples and libraries across continents. And yet, for all its reach, the road remained soft underfoot. It was not paved in stone, but traced in sand and memory. It passed through cities that rose like mirages and vanished just as quickly. Empires grew fat from its flow, then crumbled to dust when it shifted course. Picture a lone traveler, wrapped in layers against the chill of high mountain passes. In his satchel, bolts of silk, and perhaps a message scrawled on parchment. He walks not only for wealth, but for wonder. Each step forward is a step into the unknown. To journey the Silk Road was to surrender to mystery, to watch the stars for direction, to sleep beside strangers who spoke in rhythms you did not understand. And yet, somehow, there was connection. A shared nod, a shared fire, a shared story told in the flicker of lamplight and the quiet hush of the night wind. The Silk Road was the world before the world became divided, a place where borders blurred and languages overlapped, where food and music mixed freely, and a single piece of cloth could carry the scent of 5 different empires. Even now, its spirit lingers. In alleyways of old towns, in dusty manuscripts, in the flavor of cinnamon in your tea. It remains, not as a path to follow, but as a feeling. The feeling that somewhere, out there, people are walking toward one another. Slowly, quietly, with stories in their hands. Part 2. The Hidden Beginning. To understand where the Silk Road truly began, we must go back, farther than maps, deeper than written history. Long before the name existed, before Rome rose and Persia prospered, before great empires etched their borders into the earth, there were quiet beginnings in the valleys of ancient China. In those early days, the art of silk was a closely guarded secret. Legend tells of a Chinese empress sipping tea beneath a mulberry tree. A cocoon, delicate and white, dropped into her cup. As the warm water loosened its layers, the silk unraveled in a perfect, gleaming thread. So soft, so strong. From that single moment, an empire of cloth was born. The people of China learned to raise silkworms in silence. In shaded rooms, they fed them mulberry leaves, watched them spin their cocoons, and harvested the delicate filaments with steady hands. Silk was more than fabric. It was magic drawn from nature, a whisper of elegance, a treasure meant for royalty alone. At first, silk rarely left China. It was worn by nobles, wrapped around scrolls, offered to ancestors. But as kingdoms grew and curiosity stirred, the desire to trade blossomed. Horses from the West were strong, taller, faster, better suited for war, and the Chinese wanted them. In exchange, they offered silk. So began the first threads of the Great Road. The earliest contact came not from merchants, but from emissaries, ambassadors riding into unknown lands with scrolls of peace, carrying silks as gifts. Among them was Zhang Qian, a Chinese explorer sent west by the Han Emperor over 2,000 years ago. He was captured, escaped, wandered, and returned with stories of distant tribes, powerful horses, and lands with their own wonders to trade. Though his journey was harsh, it sparked the emperor's imagination. If roads could be opened, if alliances could be formed, silk could flow like rivers, and knowledge along with it. Soon, paths began to form, not paved, but beaten down by thousands of hooves and sandals. Through the hexy corridor and across the high passes, merchants ventured westward, braving sandstorms and altitude and the long ache of loneliness. They passed through trade towns that bloomed like desert flowers, oases where water was precious and shade was sacred. In these resting places, cultures collided gently. Chinese, Persian, Sogdian, Indian, each leaving behind words, coins, pottery, a lullaby, a prayer. Silk, though light to carry, was heavy with meaning. In Rome, it was worth more than its weight in gold. Senators draped it across their shoulders, mystified by the smoothness. Philosophers debated its morality, worried it was too seductive. And still, the desire for it only grew. The road widened. What began as a lifeline between empires became a web, tangled and branching. Goods were passed hand to hand. Silk traded for gems, gems for spices, spices for incense, incense for stories. There were no border checks, no flags to salute. Only trust, patience, and the unspoken rule of the traveler. Protect the road, and it will protect you. And so, the Silk Road was born, not with a grand proclamation, but through countless quiet exchanges. A merchant bartering in a dusty alley. A rider sharing tea beside a flickering fire. A child running through a market. The breeze catching the edge of a silk banner. It was a road not just of silk, but of humanity, of connection, of fragile threads that together wove the fabric of our shared world. Chapter 2: Travelers and Traders. Part 1: Faces on the Road. The Silk Road was not built by empires or kings. It was not carved with tools or mapped with precision. It was walked into existence by people, by countless footsteps in the dust, by wheels that creaked through canyons, by hooves that rang out like slow bells across the open land. And so tonight, we walk beside them. Imagine the first light of morning, the horizon just beginning to glow. A line of travelers stirs from sleep in a circle of tents. Camels grunt softly, their breath turning to mist in the cool air. Fires crackle low, heating water for tea. The sky shifts from deep violet to gold. Another day on the road begins. These were not just merchants. They were monks, scholars, wanderers, dreamers. Some sought fortune, some sought faith. Some simply followed the road because they had nowhere else to go. There were Sogdian traders from Central Asia, clever, multilingual, dressed in robes dyed with madder and indigo. They moved easily between cities, fluent in barter and diplomacy. Their caravans carried silk and spices, yes, but also letters, gossip, and secrets. They were the lifeblood of the road, connecting cultures like veins connect the heart to the hand. There were Persian glassmakers, hauling delicate vials packed in straw and resin. Their craft was admired even in distant China, where emperors marveled at cups that caught the light like liquid gems. There were Buddhist monks from India, journeying east with scrolls tucked beneath their robes, whispering chants as they walked, their minds fixed on enlightenment. They stopped in monasteries carved into cliffs, leaving behind stories painted in pigment and gold. And there were nomads, tribes that did not trade in goods, but in knowledge. They guided the caravans through dunes and mountain paths, reading stars and sand, sensing weather in the silence. These travelers rarely completed the full route. Few walked from China to Rome. Instead, they passed the burden along, like runners in a long, winding relay. Goods changed hands dozens of times. A piece of silk might begin its life in a Chinese village, travel to Dunhuang, then to Samarkand, then to Antioch, and finally arrive in a Roman villa. It carried with it not only its texture and color, but the invisible fingerprints of everyone who touched it. And with each handoff, the road itself became more than a trade route. It became a living story, a constantly evolving conversation. There were no guides, no maps set in stone. Directions were passed through memory, song, and shared firelight. A seasoned traveler might trace a path with his finger in the sand, warning of a dry well, or a village where merchants were welcome, or not. And at night, they gathered together under the same stars we see now. They ate simple meals, dried fruits, flatbread, salted meat. They shared stories and broken phrases, smiling through language barriers. Some sang, some prayed, some simply stared into the fire and let the silence speak. In these moments, the Silk Road was not about commerce, but communion. It was about the fragile beauty of strangers trusting one another in the middle of nowhere. A shared laugh, a warm bowl of lentils, a quiet moment of safety beneath the sky. These were the true architects of the road. Not the kings who claimed its riches, not the armies who marched alongside it, but the people who walked it slowly, faithfully, year after year. Their names are mostly lost to history, but their footsteps remain, carved into the wind and into the story we tell tonight. Part 2. The Rhythm of the Road. A caravan was more than a procession of traders. It was a small world in motion. A family of sorts, woven together by the road, bound not by blood, but by trust, necessity, and time. Camels walked at their own pace, steady, deliberate, almost meditative. Their gait had a swaying rhythm, like the rocking of a cradle, lulling both rider and listener into a quiet trance. Each step forward kicked up small clouds of dust, and together, the caravan formed a line that stretched like a thread across the land. Travel was slow, often no more than 20 or 30 kilometers in a day. Time stretched long, softened by silence. Some spoke quietly, others listened to the wind. Bells hung around the camels' necks, chimed gently with each step, their sound blending with the whisper of sand or the rustle of dry grass. The road passed through many landscapes, each with its own mood, its own song. There were flat plains, where the sky felt endless and the sun painted long shadows behind every traveler. There were jagged mountains, where the air turned cold and thin, and the wind howled like a voice lost in the clouds. And there were the deserts, vast, unforgiving, yet hauntingly beautiful. The Taklamakan was one such desert. Its name meant, "Go in and you won't come out. And still, traders crossed it. They followed hidden paths marked only by memory and the bones of those who came before. Caravans avoided the heart of the desert, instead tracing its edges, stopping at scattered oases like lifelines in the sand. At these oases, weary travelers found water, shade, and the sweet relief of stillness. Here, they rested beneath palm trees or in the cool shadows of mud brick inns. They unpacked their goods, fed their animals, and mended what had torn during the journey. At night, music sometimes rose into the air. Soft, stringed instruments played slowly, with voices humming lullabies in languages long forgotten. Children played with pebbles and followed the caravan drivers, mimicking their movements. Women prepared flatbreads on hot stones, while men inspected goods or shared news from far-off cities. News was passed like water, sipped, spilled, passed on. It moved faster than the caravan itself. And yet, life on the road was not always gentle. Sandstorms could come without warning, swallowing the horizon in gold and ash. Thieves might lie in wait, hidden behind rocks or among other travelers. There were disputes, injuries, exhaustion. But still, the road called, and still people walked. Some would return home with wealth. Others would not return at all. And some, like the wandering monks or the storytellers, were not seeking gold or goods. They were seeking meaning, a glimpse of the sacred hidden among the ordinary. They believed the road had a spirit of its own, that each journey was a kind of pilgrimage, a way to meet the world, and perhaps, in some quiet way, to meet themselves. In that sense, the Silk Road was never just a physical path. It was a metaphor, a mirror, a teacher. Those who walked it often spoke of feeling changed, not by what they carried, but by what they left behind. Old fears, old certainties, even old names. Because on the road, everything is in motion. Everything shifts. And so, they kept walking, one step at a time, one sunrise after another, guided not by maps, but by stars, not by borders, but by stories. And beneath every footstep, the same soft whisper, onward. Chapter 3. Across the Sands. Part 1. Deserts of Golden Silence. The Silk Road was not carved through gentle lands. It passed through some of the harshest terrain on earth. And yet, there was beauty in its dangers, stillness in its vastness, the kind of silence that speaks to the soul, if only you are quiet enough to listen. Deserts stretched for hundreds of miles, like oceans of dust and sun. The Taklamakan, the Gobi, the Kizilkum, each with its own shape, its own rhythm, its own breath. Travelers called them by different names, but they all shared one thing: an endless horizon. Imagine standing at the edge of such a place. Before you, nothing but sand. No trees, no buildings, just ripples of earth, sculpted by wind. The air is dry, tasting faintly of salt and sun. In the distance, heat shimmers, blurring the line between land and sky. You take a step, the sand gives softly beneath your foot, and the world becomes quiet. In these deserts, time slowed. Distances grew long. Days were counted not by hours, but by the rise and fall of the sun, the shade offered by your own shadow, the slow drip of water from a clay jug. And yet, even here, life found a way. Caravans moved in single file, their camels leaving long trails behind them, like brushstrokes across the sand. Guides knew how to read the wind, how to find wells buried deep beneath the surface. At night, the stars were so many they seemed to pour out of the sky, bathing the travelers in silver light. In the deepest parts of the desert, mirages danced like spirits, pools that were never there, cities that vanished as you approached. But not all the wonders were illusions. Scattered like hidden pearls were the oases, small, sacred places where water bubbled up from deep underground. Date palms swayed, green and vibrant, casting flickering shadows on the dust. Villages bloomed around these oases, places where weary travelers could rest, trade, and recover. Khotan, Turpan, Dunhuang, names whispered like charms. These towns were lifelines, waypoints on the edge of survival. Here, the desert gave back. Here, the road exhaled. The people of the desert were quiet and wise. They knew the language of wind and stone. They built their homes low and strong, shaded and cool. Their food was simple: flatbreads, dried fruits, goat cheese, stews slow cooked beneath the sun. And always there was tea, strong, bitter, poured slowly and shared with guests in small cups that seemed too delicate for such a rugged place. Hospitality in these lands was not just kindness, it was law. To refuse a traveler's shelter was to tempt the wrath of the desert itself. And so, around small fires in dark rooms, strangers became companions, if only for a night. Even in the silence of the desert, there were sounds, gentle, rhythmic, soft. The sigh of shifting sand, the whisper of cloth against skin, the low, steady breath of camels. And when the wind blew just right, the dunes themselves would sing, a long, humming tone that echoed across the emptiness, as if the earth were dreaming. Travelers who crossed these lands rarely forgot them. The desert left marks, not on the skin, but on the spirit. It taught patience, humility, reverence for the small things, a drop of water, a patch of shade, a cool breeze in the heat of the day. And so, step by slow step, they moved forward, carried by faith, guided by stars, wrapped in silence. Part 2. Through the mountains of heaven. Beyond the deserts, the Silk Road rose. Not gently, but sharply, lifting travelers into the arms of towering mountains, where clouds touched the stone and the earth seemed to breathe slower. These were the roof lines of the world, and to cross them was to enter another kind of silence, one not of heat and dust, but of wind and cold and stillness. The Pamirs, the Tian Shan, the Hindu Kush, they were not barriers, but gateways, harsh, yes, unforgiving, certainly, but also full of grace if you knew how to listen. The roads narrowed here. No wide caravans, no endless horizon, just thin trails etched into the sides of cliffs, winding like threads through rock and ice. The path tilted with each step. One side open to sky, the other to nothingness. And yet, people walked. Animals carried loads up steep switchbacks, hooves slipping now and then on loose stone. Traders held their breath, not in fear, but from awe. Around them, peaks rose like ancient gods wrapped in snow. The air thinned. The world grew quieter. You could hear your own heart here, beating in your ears, echoing through your chest. At high altitudes, breath came slower. Fires burned lower. Sleep was lighter, touched by strange dreams. But the beauty was unmatched. Glacial rivers carved silver paths through the valleys. Pines clung to the cliffs. And at night, the stars looked close enough to touch. Small villages perched in impossible places. Huts of stone and timber, roofs held down with rocks against the wind. Here, people lived with the mountains, not against them. They knew their moods, their rhythms. They grew barley in narrow terraces, herded yaks, told stories around fires built of twisted shrubs. These mountain people were generous, wary, wise. They had seen empires pass like storms. They had fed Buddhist monks and Persian explorers, Chinese officials and Arab poets. And they had watched, again and again, as those travelers disappeared back into the snow. There was a kind of peace up here, a kind of truth. No noise, no rush, just the crunch of boots on frost, the groan of ice, the hush of falling snow. And the road continued, ever forward. In places, it dipped into hidden valleys where hot springs steamed in the cold air. In others, it passed shrines stacked with prayer flags, bright scraps of color fluttering in the wind, messages to the heavens written in ink and breath. Some travelers wept when they reached the top of a pass, not from sorrow, but from sheer wonder. From the feeling that they were standing on the spine of the earth, with the whole world stretching out in every direction. It wasn't just a journey of trade. It was a pilgrimage of the soul. And so they walked, slowly, steadily, wrapped in wool, leaning into the wind, placing one foot before the other, letting the mountains carry them, not just forward, but inward, into memory, into quiet, into the kind of sleep that begins with the closing of the eyes and ends in a dream that never quite fades. Chapter 4. The Bazaars, Part 1. Cities of Dust and Color. After the silence of the mountains and the slow hush of the desert, the cities felt like a dream come to life. They rose like mirages from the dust, walled towns shimmering in the heat, domes glinting beneath the sun, banners fluttering in winds scented with cinnamon and saffron. These were the gathering places, the crossroads of culture. The Silk Road was made of sand and stone, yes, but here it found its voice. Cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, Kashgar, Merv, and Aleppo, each one a jewel, each one a tapestry, stitched together from 1,000 stories, languages, spices, fabrics, and faces. Approaching the gates, travelers would hear the city before they saw it. Bells ringing, children laughing, the thrum of voices layered in a dozen tongues, camels groaning beneath their loads, water splashing from fountains in courtyards paved with mosaic tiles, music drifting from unseen windows, soft flutes, low drums, a voice singing a melody as old as the city walls. Inside, the streets curved like rivers, narrow and twisting, shaded by awnings and balconies. Above them, the walls were painted in pale pinks, rich blues, deep ochres, colors pulled from the earth and the imagination alike. And at the heart of each city was the bazaar. The marketplace was not just a place to trade, it was the city's soul, a theater, a garden of voices and smells and shimmering sights. There were stalls overflowing with bolts of silk dyed in emerald, sapphire, and gold, jars of honey and rose water, baskets of almonds, pistachios, and figs so sweet they seemed to melt on the tongue. There were merchants selling spices in neat pyramids, turmeric as bright as sunlight, cinnamon curled like paper scrolls, pepper black as obsidian. You could buy lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, porcelain from China, carpets from Persia, incense from Arabia. And if you stopped to look, even for a moment, the merchants would smile and begin their song. Not pushy, not rude, just playful. Each word part of a dance that had been rehearsed for centuries. Ah, for you, traveler, this price is a gift. Feel this silk, like wind through your fingers, yes? Voices overlapped, blending with the clink of coins, the soft mutter of bargaining, and the laughter of strangers meeting for the first time. But it wasn't only goods that changed hands. There were scholars reciting poetry in hidden corners, calligraphers writing names in Arabic, Persian, Sanskrit, and Chinese, astrologers reading stars from scrolls too old to date, monks copying texts by hand, pilgrims trading charms for prayers, musicians plucking ancient melodies in quiet alleys, their notes echoing like footsteps in a dream. The bazaar was a living museum, a breathing archive. You could buy a jar of oil pressed in the same way as 1,000 years before, or taste bread baked in an oven that never cooled, or hear a story passed from one generation to the next, shaped like clay by the hands of time. And at night, the streets dimmed, lanterns flickered, doors closed one by one. But the city still breathed. The scent of spices lingered in the stones. The laughter of the day echoed in the silence. In the stars above, the same one seen from desert and mountain now blinked down on rooftops and domes, lighting the dreams of those who slept within. Part 2. Quiet corners, secret worlds. Beyond the markets and courtyards, beyond the clamor of trade and the shimmer of silk, there were places of stillness, sanctuaries tucked inside the cities, spaces where the noise of the world slipped away and something softer could take root. You might pass through a narrow alley and find yourself standing before a hammam, a public bathhouse, warm with steam and murmured voices. Inside, stone walls glistened with moisture. Domed ceilings filtered in soft light. The scent of soap and citrus clung to the air. Travelers, merchants, and locals alike came here not just to wash, but to rest, to let go, to be human again. Water flowed slowly, drawn from underground wells and poured by hand from brass jugs. Attendants moved with quiet grace, heating stones, offering towels, preparing tea. And there, wrapped in warmth and mist, bodies tired from weeks on the road could melt into calm. Muscles softened, eyes closed, minds quieted. Then there were the gardens, hidden behind high walls, blooming even in the driest lands, built in the image of paradise. Cypress trees, pomegranate blossoms, jasmine vines, pools of still water reflecting the sky, birds calling softly from branches heavy with fruit. These gardens were not just for beauty. They were for reflection, for prayer, for sleep. A place to remember that peace was possible, even on a road built from uncertainty. In many cities, there were libraries, sometimes grand, sometimes small, but always sacred. Rooms lined with scrolls and books, knowledge gathered from across empires, texts on medicine, astronomy, philosophy, poetry, trade routes, star charts, and ancient riddles. Here, monks and scholars worked by lamplight, copying each word with reverence, as if they were preserving the breath of the world itself. Some travelers lingered in these cities for months, even years. They came to trade, yes, but also to learn, to teach, to listen, to fall in love, to start again. Because in the crossroads of the Silk Road, identities blurred. A man might arrive as a merchant and leave as a student. A woman might arrive as a refugee and become a poet. Religions mingled, ideas danced, cultures blended, and the city absorbed them all without question. There was a rhythm to it, morning call to prayer, midday meals of lentils and warm flatbread, evening walks beneath lanterns, the soft sweep of a broom across stone floors, the rustle of a silk curtain in a warm breeze. Time in these cities did not pass. It flowed, and even for those who only stayed a night or two, the impression was lasting. A place where strangers were welcomed, where the world felt wide but kind. A place to remember that every road, no matter how long or difficult, had its moments of shelter, of light, of silence. And when it came time to leave, when the camels were packed again and the gates lay open to the horizon, the traveler would look back, not just at the walls and towers, but at the feeling, the warmth, the music, the peace of a night beneath stars that felt a little closer, a little more familiar. Then, once more, they would turn to the road. Chapter 5. Hidden Cargo. Part 1. Silk, Stones, and Secrets. The Silk Road was named for one thing, but it carried so much more. Yes, silk flowed in shimmering waves across the route, delicate, luminous, dyed with colors pulled from earth and flower. But this was only the beginning. The road was a river of treasures, and every caravan was a vessel filled with dreams, both seen and unseen. There was jade from the mountains of Khotan, green and smooth like frozen water, carved into ornaments and talismans. In Chinese courts, jade was said to hold the soul steady after death. Traders wrapped it in soft cloth, cradled it as if it were alive. There were spices, not just for taste, but for medicine, ritual, and preservation. Cloves, nutmeg, saffron, cardamom. They came in pouches and jars, wrapped in waxed leaves or nestled in pottery. Some were so rare that a single handful could buy a horse. Others were passed hand to hand as offerings, gifts between strangers who spoke no common tongue. There were scrolls and books filled with philosophies, prayers, discoveries, and riddles. A single text, carried by a monk from India, could spark a new school of thought in a distant land. Languages intertwined: Sanskrit, Arabic, Chinese, Greek, all whispering to one another through fragile pages. There was glass from the Roman world, blown into vases, beads, and delicate drinking cups. Chinese travelers had never seen such objects before, and to them, glass was a kind of sorcery. Light caught inside a vessel, transparency from fire. There was paper, invented in China and slowly making its way west, reshaping how knowledge moved, how stories were told. It replaced stone and silk as the canvas for ideas, and it spread like fire in dry grass, quiet, unstoppable, profound. And then there were the stranger things: bundles wrapped too tightly to inspect, powders stored in small, corked flasks, dried leaves said to heal wounds or open the mind, stones carved with unknown symbols, feathers of birds not found on any known maps, fragments of statues, seeds of plants not meant to grow in the traveler's homeland. Some of these items were meant for science, others for ceremony. Some were sold with stories attached. This powder brings visions. This leaf wards off demons. This stone hums when the moon is full. And who could say what was true? On a road like this, where myths walked beside men, truth was often dressed in mystery. There were whispered rumors of sacred herbs used by shamans in distant forests, wrapped in cloth stained with incense smoke. Some said they allowed the soul to travel beyond the body. Others claimed they brought healing dreams, visions of ancestors, or glimpses of hidden worlds. Even the most rational merchant might carry one or two such items, just in case. Tucked into a corner of the satchel, wrapped with reverence, never spoken of aloud, because the road was not only about trade, it was about transmission, of wonder, of wisdom, of the unknown. And sometimes, the most valuable cargo could not be priced. It could only be felt. In the hush of night, when the fire burned low and stars shimmered overhead, a traveler might reach into his pack and hold one such object in his hands. Turn it over slowly, feel its weight, wonder about its origin, its power, its purpose. And in that moment, he was no longer a merchant. He was a keeper of something older than trade, a carrier of curiosity, a student of the unknown. Part 2: Powder, Prayer, and the Philosopher's Stone. Not everything that crossed the Silk Road could be weighed or measured. Among the bolts of silk and bundles of spice were other things, softer, stranger, often unnamed. Their value lay not in gold, but in meaning, in myth, in mystery. Some merchants carried alchemical powders, substances said to prolong life, transmute metal, or unlock hidden truths. These powders, usually packed in tiny sealed boxes or ceramic vials, were passed from hand to hand like riddles, made from crushed minerals, roots, or secret combinations known only to those in the deepest circles of knowledge. They were whispered to have great power. In the West, They called it the philosopher's stone, a legendary substance that could turn lead into gold or offer immortality. But in the East, it was more subtle. It was the elixir of balance, of harmony between the body and the stars, a powder for clarity, a tablet for the spirit. Most of these treasures never worked as promised, but belief traveled with them, and belief, too, was traded, just as precious as silk or jade. There were amulets, small carvings of wood, bone, or precious stone. Some bore ancient symbols, others the names of forgotten gods. Travelers would wear them around the neck or stitch them into their clothing. They were not ornaments, they were protection, a charm against thieves, against sickness, against getting lost in the desert wind. Some amulets came with rituals, chants that had to be whispered as the sun rose, or salt that must be sprinkled at each new crossing. Even the most skeptical trader might follow the custom, not out of fear, but out of respect. On the Silk Road, no one walked entirely alone. Every step echoed with those who came before. Every talisman was a thread in the unseen fabric that held the road together. There were also fragments of texts, books torn or burned, surviving only in parts. Some believed these pieces still held power, even in their brokenness. Passages of poetry, ancient formulas, prayers written in careful ink. One line might be enough to change a man's fortune, or so they said. And then there were the truly strange things. A black rock, polished smooth and warm to the touch, said to have fallen from the sky. A jar of honey harvested from bees that fed only on a sacred flower. A bundle of dried petals wrapped in cloth, passed down through generations, used only during the longest nights of winter. Not all these items were traded for coin. Some were traded for stories. Others were given freely, with a nod, a smile, and the simple words, "You may need this more than I do." And what did they all mean? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. Because on the Silk Road, belief was part of the cargo. It flowed like spice on the wind. It seeped into the cracks between trade and truth. It reminded travelers that they were part of something larger than themselves. A shared story, a moving prayer, a mystery stitched into every step. And as the caravans moved on, their shadows stretching long behind them, the things they carried, seen and unseen, drifted onward too. Some reached their destination. Others vanished along the way. But all of them, in some quiet way, shaped the world they passed through. And perhaps, in the night, as we lie in our beds and listen to the hush of the stars, we still carry a few of them with us. Chapter 6: Faith and Pilgrimage. Part 1: The Road as Temple. Long before it was called the Silk Road, this path across the earth was a way of seeking. Not only wealth, not only wonder, but something deeper. For many who walked it, the road itself became a kind of temple, a sacred space stretched across continents, paved not with marble, but with footsteps, carried not by sermons, but by silence. Faith did not move by decree. It moved by whispers, by the soft rustle of robes, the turning of prayer beads, the hush of breath beneath the stars. Along the Silk Road, religions met not in conflict, but in conversation. Buddhism, Islam, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Taoism, and older faiths still, each one passing through the cities and valleys, deserts and shrines, carried in the hearts of pilgrims and the pages of sacred texts. Imagine a Buddhist monk walking east to west or west to east, robes faded by the sun, a small satchel on his back. In it, scrolls copied by hand, perhaps a wooden carving of the Buddha, a dried lotus flower wrapped in cloth. His steps are slow, deliberate, each one a prayer. He stops in Dunhuang, at the edge of the Gobi, where temples are carved into the cliffside like frozen waves. Inside, golden statues sit in stillness. Murals bloom across the walls, scenes from the life of the Buddha, drawn in colors so vivid they seem to breathe. Here, he rests, offers thanks, reads by lantern light, then moves on, following the thread of the road toward new lands. Elsewhere, a Muslim scholar rides beneath a canopy of stars. He recites verses from memory, humming softly into the night. In the city of Bukhara, he will visit a madrasa, its courtyard filled with the quiet rustle of students reading under pomegranate trees. He will sit in the shade and write, ink flowing like a stream, capturing thoughts as they pass through him. A Christian merchant from the Near East, bearing a small cross carved from olive wood, shares bread with a stranger in a mountain pass. They speak different tongues, but share the same meal. The fire between them warms their hands, and the stars above ask no questions. Sometimes, the road itself seemed to carry its own spirit. A presence felt in the silence between footsteps, a weightless awareness, neither seen nor named, something ancient and kind, watching over all who moved through the land with open hands. Faith along the Silk Road did not demand, it invited. It traveled gently, slipped into languages, songs, rituals. It lingered in water, drawn for washing, in shadows cast by shrines, in the eyes of a child kneeling beside a parent at dawn. The road was sacred, not because of any single god, but because it connected people in their longing for peace, for understanding, for the divine. And sometimes the divine was not found in temples or texts. It was found in the journey itself, in the long walk, the shared silence, the act of moving forward, even without knowing exactly why. Part 2. Temples in the Dust. If the road was a thread, then its sacred places were the beads. Spaced at intervals, smooth with touch, worn by prayer. They were never all the same. Some were towering structures with domes that glinted in the sun, while others were little more than carved stone, tucked into a hillside, half swallowed by time and sand. But all of them breathed with the same hush, the breath of belief. Across the route, in valleys and deserts, oases and cities, places of worship rose quietly from the earth. In Buddhist caves like Mogao, near the edge of the Taklamakan Desert, monks carved sanctuaries into the stone. Inside, vast murals bloomed across every surface. Stories of compassion, of rebirth, of light within shadow. These were not just temples, but libraries, filled with scrolls preserved in darkness for centuries. The cool, dry air kept their secrets intact, as if even nature honored the words written there. Worshippers would light a single candle. Its flame flickering would cast shadows across painted Buddhas with calm eyes hands poised in timeless gestures. Here, no one rushed. Even silence moved slowly. Farther west, in Persian lands, mosques welcomed travelers with open courtyards, geometric patterns blooming like stars across tiled walls. Voices echoed gently beneath domes, reciting verses that seemed to ripple across the sky. Cool marble beneath bare feet. Water in shallow fountains, washing dust from hands and hearts. Prayer here was rhythmic, cyclical, 5 times a day, each pause folding time like cloth, reminding the faithful that there is always stillness in motion, always return and departure. Along the same path stood Zoroastrian fire temples, where eternal flames were kept alive, burning day and night. The flame was more than light. It was memory, continuity, the shared heat of the human soul. Worshippers would bow in silence, eyes reflecting the fire, hands raised in quiet reverence. In mountain passes and quiet forests, there were Taoist shrines, marked not by grandeur, but by integration. Built into the land, not upon it. Their wood aged into harmony with the trees around them. Their altars set beside rivers or under cliffs, places where wind and water whispered teachings that could not be written. And in small corners of the West, Christian chapels sat near caravanserais, places of refuge for the body and the soul alike. Painted icons glowed in candlelight. Songs in Aramaic or Greek or early Arabic floated upward like smoke. Travelers knelt in silence, crossing themselves with weary, grateful hands. What united these places was not the structure, nor the doctrine, but the function. Each was a pause, a breath, a moment to reconnect to something bigger, something softer. For many who crossed the Silk Road, these sacred places were more than houses of worship. They were anchors. After days or weeks of shifting landscape, unfamiliar languages, and physical exhaustion, they offered the comfort of the eternal. A reminder that beneath every robe, every cloak, every robe of silk or wool, beat a heart moved by awe. Sometimes these holy places marked the end of a pilgrimage, a final destination, a longed-for moment of arrival. But more often, they were simply stops along the way, sanctuaries not of arrival, but of restoration, resting places for the spirit, a bowl of lentils offered by a monk, a prayer whispered in a forgotten dialect, a candle flickering beneath a starless sky. And when the traveler left, he did not leave empty. He carried something with him, not gold, not cloth, not relic, but a feeling, a peace that hummed beneath the ribs, a memory of stillness, a sacred hush that would walk beside him for the rest of the road, and perhaps long after the road itself was gone. Chapter 7: Myths and Dangers. Part 1. Whispers in the Wind. Not all who walked the Silk Road did so under the light of day. There were moments when the shadows grew long, and the road felt less like a thread and more like a question, one whispered by the wind, unanswered by the stars. Because for all its beauty, the Silk Road was not without its dangers. There were the obvious ones, bandits, for instance. Men who knew the land better than any map, who watched from hidden ledges or distant dunes. They waited not for the strong, but for the weary. Not for the well-guarded, but for the ones who strayed. A lone traveler, a broken cart, a lost caravan slipping behind the rest. They came silently, took quickly, and disappeared like smoke. Caravans learned to guard themselves. Traders hired warriors. Guards rode beside the camels, always watching the horizon. But fear still traveled with them, tucked between bolts of silk, folded inside pouches of gold. Then there were sandstorms, fierce, sudden, and absolute. One moment the sky was clear, and the next it turned to fire and smoke. The wind howled with a voice older than language, and the world disappeared. Travelers wrapped cloth around their faces, gripped rope lines, and waited, sometimes hours, sometimes days, for the world to return. More subtle were the natural traps, dry wells, cracked paths that gave way beneath your feet, poisonous plants that looked like herbs, water that gleamed in the distance but never existed. The land itself could mislead, and only those who listened carefully, who read the earth like scripture, could pass unharmed. And then there were the stories, myths, legends, warnings passed in hushed tones beside campfires, not meant to terrify, but to remind that not all dangers could be seen. They spoke of jinn, desert spirits who moved like wind and shadow. They could lead you in circles until your camel collapsed. They could slip into your dreams and steal your name. Some were protectors. Others were tricksters, always unpredictable. Travelers would place a small offering, dates, incense, a whispered prayer at the edge of camp before sleep, just in case. In the mountains, they spoke of the echo people, souls who never found rest, who wandered in storms, repeating the last words they spoke in life. To hear them meant you were too high, too alone, and needed to turn back. There were tales of disappearing cities, mirages that seemed solid, even welcoming. Gates open, fires lit, music drifting through the air. And yet, as the traveler approached, the city would vanish, leaving only flat earth and silence. Some said they were memories of ancient empires, caught in time. Others believed they were traps set by spirits, illusions meant to lure the lost deeper into the unknown. Even animals became legends. A white leopard seen only in snowstorms. A serpent that guarded a spring in the desert, striking only those with ill intent. Birds that flew in circles over hidden treasure, never landing, never sleeping. And of course, the road itself held power. There were places where the air grew colder for no reason, where compasses spun, where no fire would stay lit. These spots were often avoided or crossed in silence. No jokes, no singing, just steady steps and glances toward the sky. Yet for all these stories, for all these fears, travelers still came. Why? Perhaps because wonder was always just a little stronger than fear. Because the same fire that cast long shadows also gave warmth. Because every myth carried a truth, and every danger a lesson. And because deep down they knew the road was not meant to be safe. It was meant to be meaningful. So they listened to the legends, respected the land, and kept walking, step by step, word by word, toward whatever waited just beyond the next bend in the path. Part 2. Night rites and unspoken rules. When darkness fell on the Silk Road, it brought with it a different kind of world. By day, the road was trade and dust, camels and clinking coins. But by night, it became something else entirely, quieter, older, more intimate. The wind changed tone. The stars blinked like eyes that had seen everything. And travelers grew small beneath the sky. In that vastness, rituals became anchors. Superstition and tradition intertwined, not as chains, but as soft threads of protection, woven through every culture, every faith, every whispered story passed from camp to camp. Some caravans lit small fires not for heat, but to create a circle of safety. It was said that spirits respected the border between light and dark. The fire marked the human world. Outside it, the wilds. Others traveled with charms sewn into their robes, a bit of red thread tied around the wrist, a silver bead stitched into a sleeve, an herb pressed into a hidden pocket. These weren't just cultural ornaments. They were silent shields, a drop of rose water on the forehead before sleep, a short verse whispered to the sky after the final meal, the rearranging of stones at a camp's edge, little acts, unnoticed by outsiders, but heavy with meaning to those who performed them. And sometimes the danger came not from outside, but from within. A creeping doubt, a rising panic. The vastness of the desert or the isolation of the mountains could stretch a man's mind thin. Travelers spoke of dreams that felt too real, of waking in the night unsure if they were still themselves, of hearing footsteps behind them when no one was there, of seeing lights in the distance that flickered like stars but moved like eyes. It wasn't fear in the ordinary sense. It was something subtler, a feeling that the road was watching you back. And so, people created their own codes. Never whistle at night. Never call someone by their name after sundown. Never leave food uncovered while sleeping. Always greet the wind if it changes direction suddenly. Never drink the last of the water without thanking the earth. These rules weren't enforced by law or religion. They were passed in stories, in jokes told too seriously, in sideways glances that said, "We don't do that here." Caravan leaders were often chosen not just for strength or knowledge of the land, but for their steadiness, their calm when others grew uneasy, their ability to carry not only goods, but the unspoken weight of everyone's hope. It's said that when fear touched a camp, a good leader wouldn't speak loudly. Instead, he'd simply begin a story, something soft, something slow, a tale from his youth, or a legend of a road longer than this one, where someone brave did something good. And as the words filled the night, the shadows grew smaller. Because stories themselves were a kind of protection. They reminded people they were not alone, that others had walked before them, that even the darkest roads ended somewhere, that every ghost was once a man, and every fear had already been faced by someone long ago. And so, they told stories, and said prayers, and placed small offerings at the edge of the firelight, and slept with one eye on the stars. Not out of fear, but out of respect, for the land, for the journey, for the unseen world that lived just beyond the veil of night. And when morning returned, with its pink and gold light, everything softened again. The superstitions were tucked back into satchels, the charms kissed once and hidden once more. The fire put out, the path ahead open, and once again the road continued. Chapter 8. Courtesans, Companions, and the Quiet Flame. The Silk Road was not only a passage for gold and silk, not only for scrolls, spices, and ideas. It was also a passage for longing, for connection, for moments of closeness between people who might never meet again. Love traveled the Silk Road, not always as thunderous passion, but as a quiet flame flickering in the shadows of caravan inns and city courtyards. In the great cities of the road, Samarkand, Bukhara, Khotan, Luoyang, Merv, there were women and men who offered more than conversation or comfort. They were known as courtesans, musicians, storytellers, dancers. Some were trained from a young age to entertain nobles and visiting merchants. Others arrived at the profession by fate, but many were respected as artists in their own right. They sang in many languages: Persian love poetry, Chinese odes, Turkic ballads, and whispered lullabies known only in the mountains. Their hands were skilled not only in touch, but in calligraphy, music, and massage. They poured tea with perfect grace. They played the oud and the guzheng beneath moonlight. They quoted poets long dead and wrote verses of their own. And though silver changed hands, many of the connections formed in those candlelit rooms were not about payment. They were about presence. A tired merchant far from home, sharing figs and wine with someone who saw past his robes, a monk who had sworn off love, lingering a moment too long as a dancer moved like flame, a translator and a tea girl who met once each season, saying little, holding hands until dawn. Love along the Silk Road was not always spoken aloud. It was written in glances, in folded notes tucked into robes, in songs performed for one person in a crowded room. Sometimes, the love lasted only a night. Sometimes, it burned across years, rekindled each time the road brought them to the same city. And sometimes, it ended in silence, in parting. But always, it left something behind. Courtesans knew the stories of the road. They listened. They remembered. In a world where borders shifted and languages blurred, they were keepers of continuity, bridges between cultures, between strangers, between what is sold and what is sacred. Some were deeply spiritual, blending sensuality with ritual. In places like India, the boundary between lover and mystic was thin. In Persia, love was often seen as a mirror of the divine. Even in the Buddhist temples near Dunhuang, murals showed celestial maidens, half goddess, half dancer, hovering in the skies. Not all love on the Silk Road was soft. There were tragedies, jealousies, separations. Some were never free to choose whom they loved. But even in sorrow, there was depth, humanity. And so the Silk Road became not just a trade route, but a ribbon of human experience, of touch, of tenderness, of desire folded into ritual. Somewhere, in a candlelit room above a market street, someone played a soft melody for a traveler. Somewhere, a pair of hands met for the last time. Somewhere, a name was whispered, not to be remembered by history, but remembered by the heart. Love, too, left footprints in the sand. Chapter 9. The Fading of the Road. Part 1. When the dust settled, nothing lasts forever. not even a road built by dreams. For centuries, the Silk Road pulsed with life, a thread of connection stretching from east to west, from China to the Mediterranean, stitching together empires, ideas, and souls. But over time, even the strongest threads begin to fray. The end did not come all at once. It came softly, in waves, a slow dimming, like lanterns being extinguished one by one. It began with shifts in power. The empires that protected the road grew tired, or broke apart, or turned inward. Dynasties fell, borders changed, wars spilled across the trade routes like ink across parchment, blurring what was once clear. Caravans became rarer. Some cities were abandoned. Others faded into villages. What once echoed with the noise of trade and voices now filled with wind and silence. Then came disease, the great shadow that moved faster than any caravan. The Black Death traveled along the very paths built for trade. What had once carried silk and cinnamon now carried something invisible and deadly. Towns that once welcomed travelers closed their gates. Fear spread faster than camels could carry. And while the land shifted, the sea began to speak louder. European ships, powered by sails and new ambitions, began sailing around Africa to reach the riches of the East. Faster, cheaper, and far less dangerous than the old land routes. Spices could now be bought in Lisbon, silk unloaded in Venice, without ever touching the sands of the Taklamakan or the stones of Samarkand. The ocean had become the new road. And so, the Silk Road, once the heartbeat of the world, grew quiet. Markets closed, monasteries emptied. Roads once worn smooth by thousands of feet became rough again. Grass grew where caravans once passed. Walls crumbled, wells ran dry. Some cities held on. Places like Bukhara and Kashgar remained as echoes of their former glory. But others, once bright as stars, vanished without a trace. The road had always been a living thing, and like all living things, it aged, softened, and let go. But even as its body faded, its spirit remained. Because the Silk Road was never just geography. It was never just a route between cities. It was a philosophy, a rhythm, a proof that connection was always possible, no matter the distance. And even as the path itself disappeared, the ideas it carried kept moving. Buddhism continued to bloom in far corners of the world. Mathematics and astronomy, once traded in dusty scrolls, became the roots of modern science. Paper and printing revolutionized knowledge. Words borrowed from distant lands still rest in the languages we speak today. Silk is still worn, spices still treasured. Music still bears the fingerprints of instruments born far away. The road may have faded from maps, but not from memory. And perhaps, in the quiet hours before sleep, we still walk it in our minds, following shadows across sand, listening for bells in the distance, pausing at oases where the stars reflect in still water, tracing the path with our breath, our heartbeat, our dreams, because a road like that never truly ends. Part 2. Echoes in the Dust. Even as the Silk Road faded from the world's surface, it lingered, in the silence, in the stories, in the smallest corners of memory. There are still places where the wind carries its name, a broken archway, half buried in sand, a fragment of glazed tile glinting in the sun, a ruined watchtower leaning toward the past. They stand like ghosts, not haunting, but humming with history, and if you walk there, slowly, quietly, you might feel it, that gentle pull, as if the road itself remembers, in the stones beneath your feet, in the distant rhythm of camel bells that aren't really there, in the warmth of a stranger's smile. The road was never just a path between cities. It was a path between people, a mirror held up to the best of what we are when we choose to meet instead of divide, to offer instead of withhold, to listen even when we don't understand the language. Even today, we carry pieces of it with us, in teacups patterned with blue from distant dynasties, in lullabies that drift across cultures, bearing melodies older than memory, in books printed on paper, an invention that once rode silently across the desert on the back of a mule. We carry it in the words we borrow and never return, in the food on our tables, in the rhythms of music born from 100 migrations. We carry it in curiosity, in wonder, in the desire to know someone far away, not for gain, but for connection. Perhaps the Silk Road never truly disappeared. Perhaps it just changed shape. It lives now in satellites and screens, in translated messages sent in milliseconds across oceans, in shared laughter between people who may never meet, but still feel known. We are still walking it in new ways, still crossing invisible borders, still trading stories, still lighting fires in the dark, inviting others to sit beside us and speak. And in that way, the road continues, not as sand beneath our feet, but as a thread through our lives, a gentle reminder that long ago, the world decided to connect, not just through empire or economy, but through touch, taste, and tale. And maybe, tonight, in this quiet space between waking and dream, we walk it once more. We travel not to arrive, but to remember. And somewhere, in a desert that lives only in the imagination, a caravan moves beneath the stars. Conclusion: the road that sleeps beneath us. And now we rest. The Silk Road lies behind us, its winds and whispers fading like a story at the edge of memory. The fire has burned low. The caravan has passed. The night grows still. What began as a thread of silk, of dust, of breath, has wound its way through time and space, through mountains and mirage, through temples and markets and starlit silence. A road without a map, a journey without an end. You have walked it gently, step by step. You felt the weight of ancient cloth between your fingers, heard the soft bargaining of merchants, tasted honey touched by centuries, slept in hidden gardens, and listened to the quiet teachings of stone. You've drifted through cities that now live only in wind. You've walked beside monks, merchants, poets, and strangers whose names are long lost, but whose footsteps still echo in the sand. And now, the road grows quiet. There is no need to go farther. no destination to reach, just the slow, rhythmic breath of a world at peace. Somewhere, far away, a bell rings softly in the night. A camel sighs. A lantern is extinguished. And in the space between stars, a traveler lies down beneath the sky and closes their eyes just as you are now. The road is still here, woven into you. A path that asks nothing but presence. A memory that asks nothing but rest. So breathe. Let the dust settle behind you. Let the stories slip into your dreams. Let the rhythm of the road become the rhythm of your breath. You've journeyed far enough for tonight. And now, the Silk Road sleeps with you. Thank you for listening, friend. Please subscribe and leave a like. Your quiet support helps us keep crafting peaceful journeys for you. Until next time.